Good evening, everyone. I am delighted to be here this evening to share my passion for gardening, especially perennials. I have a tendency to talk too long. I hope everyone got a handout. It's going to be a slide-by-slide opportunity to write notes on what you might be interested in, trying to focus on just a few of my favorite plants. My garden club always laughs and says, it's her favorite plant, and it's everything is my favorite plant. So my interest in gardening started very innocently over almost 40 years ago when we purchased our current home. It was your typical builder's property, an acre and a half of full sun, house under construction, mountains of soil, essentially devoid of all vegetation. Had a few wild trees. It had every single plant on the current invasive plant list. Multiflora roses, buckthorn, bittersweet, you name it, and I still have most of those, but I'm trying hard to get rid of them. At the time, I commuted into Boston to do cancer research, but my mother, who is now 91 years old and still gardens 5 to 6 hours a day in 3 homes out in Arizona, insisted a house was not a home without a perennial garden. So she brought me a few dozen perennials, and I planted instant gardens on either side of my driveway. I knew absolutely nothing about soil preparation, garden design, or culture. Basically, my approach was throw the plants in the air. Wherever they landed on the ground, that's where they were planted. The beauty of perennials is they're remarkably forgiving. So with just a few hours on the weekend, my little gardens actually did quite well. But a few years later, I stayed home to raise the kids, and that's when the weekend hobby became a full-time obsession. I had to own one of every perennial on the market. I ordered from every catalog that came in the mail. I shopped at every nursery on the South Shore. Then I started meandering to garden centers north and west of Boston, Mahoney's in Winchester, Lexington Gardens, sad to see that's no longer around. And I still go to Russell's several times a year in Wayland, which is probably pretty close to you guys. The difficulty for obsessive-compulsive type personalities is they are never satiated. So as program chairman for my garden club at the time, I started specializing in specific plant families. First it was bearded iris. They're so beautiful. And I gathered about 125 varieties in about 2 years. High maintenance plants, they need too much babying. I had kids, so I moved on from that to daylilies. I got a speaker on daylilies, became addicted overnight, and within a few years I had over 800 cultivars of daylilies. But in the meantime, I was planting all those cute little woody plants. Little blue spruces, little crabapple trees, little magnolia trees. Do we all know what happens after 38 years of planting cute little trees? I went from an acre and a half of full sun to over 1/2 shade. A whole new group of plants to collect. So now the passion is hostas, and I'm up to about 300 cultivars of hostas. And I love my shade gardens. The older I get, the more I enjoy the cooler temperatures. And as you mature and learn more about gardening, you start realizing that it isn't just about the flowers. It's really a lot about the foliage. If it has a beautiful flower, if it's a perennial, how long is it going to bloom? A week, maybe 2 weeks. If you're really lucky, 3 weeks. But if it has ugly foliage, you look at that all summer long. So now it's all about the leaves, and especially if you have a shady garden, you can have a magnificent garden in the shade just with foliage. And hopefully tonight's presentation will ensure you that that's the situation. Most of all, go out, and this is a great time of the year to dig new gardens. Soils are warm, dry, really dry, and workable. And you can really prepare a new garden, add all the good stuff, the compost, the shredded leaves, manure, anything you need to improve the soil, and start, take your list and spend the whole winter designing your garden. So we're going to start off, and I do think the ideal garden is a combination of small ornamental trees and shrubs. Do your homework before you plant. And don't believe nursery tags. I work at a garden center, and I'll tell you, they lie. I honestly believe what they put on a nursery tag is what they think you want the plant to do, not what it's actually going to do. So, don't believe nursery tags. There are great references out there, a special Michael Durr's book on woody plants, but a combination of bulbs, perennials, small ornamental trees and shrubs, ornamental grasses, and I've become a convert to annuals too. It took a long time, but now especially in decorative containers that I put in my garden. So we're going to dash through the seasons. I was asked to cover dividing plants as well, which is really a totally different program, so that's why I'm concerned about running over. But I put one note on there that said, ideally, the rule of thumb is if it blooms in the spring, transplant in the fall. If it blooms in the fall, transplant in the spring. And if it blooms somewhere in between, you usually have your choice. But I've got a few photographs of how to divide, and I will mention it for the more common perennials as to when to divide, how to divide, and some that are hard to divide. So, spring did finally come this year. It took a long time. I had snow on the ground in my yard until April 17th. So it was, 8 feet of snow on my deck. I mean, it was kind of scary. My deck's being replaced because of it. So, but spring comes and we get spring fever, and what do? We rush to the garden center, and we always buy everything that's in bloom. Do you have a plant sale? Yes. Does not the first thing that always sells first at a plant sale the things that have flowers on them? Yes. And we're all guilty. We buy things based on their flowers. And they bloom for 2 weeks, and then we're left with the foliage. So try to visit the nurseries throughout the season. I know at the nursery I work at right now, they've got just a whole bunch of beautiful plants that bloom at this time of the year. So you'll see some of those. But, I love to extend the flowering season. And this is witch hazel, Arnold Promise, developed at the Arnold Arboretum. I've had it bloom as early as January 24th in my garden. And it looks like a giant bush of forsythia in a way. But the nice thing about it is it's fragrant. It has nice foliage. It has architecture. And it blooms for 8 weeks. So it's really a great asset to the early spring garden. Most times it blooms around Valentine's Day. This year it bloomed in March, but everything bloomed a little bit late this year. But but no one buys it. Why? Because it's finished blooming by the time we finally go to the garden centers. So you have to look for it. They come in other colors as well, but that's another lecture. Our flowering dogwood trees, some of these ornamental trees don't grow so big that you can grow plants beneath them. So I love the American dogwood. Obviously, it has its problems with anthracnose, which is a disease. Crabapple trees, they bloom every year. This is the crabapple tree I planted 35 years ago. It was this big. I can tell you that it's considerably wider. This is it mature now. It is wider than this stage, and at least 35 feet tall. So, again, but I love it because it has small fruits that attract huge flocks of cedar waxwings and about probably 15, 20 different species of birds during the fall season. So crab apples are great, but know that they get big and that they sucker. So do your homework. Spring flowering bulbs, even though they bloom for a week, 10 days, we need that, we need those in the spring. The worst part is waiting for the foliage to go away, especially on daffodils. But, you have your snowdrops, your early crocuses, you have later crocuses. Scillas, if you have shade, scilla is a great naturalizer for the shade, almost to the point of being a nuisance. It'll end up in your lawn and every other garden in the yard. And grape hyacinths and tulips. Daffodils, people say, oh, daffodils grow in the shade. If you give them too much shade, they're really not going to continue to bloom year after year. So yes, They'll tolerate more shade than some, but I think they're better off in as much sun as you can give them. Hyacinths, of all the bulbs I have ever planted, hyacinths have lived the longest. I have hyacinths that are 38 years old and keep coming up every year. I find the fragrance overpowering, but it's okay outside. I just can't tolerate them inside. And then, of course, you have your tulips, which are good for about 2 years, and then you have to replant them. So all different kinds of bulbs, but we're talking mainly tonight about perennials. And we're going to do this season by season, starting off with the shade, because most shade bloomers tend to bloom before the trees leaf out to take advantage of the sunlight. So a lot of our earliest blooming perennials are either native wildflowers or shade-loving perennials. So we're starting in the shade, and I have a bad habit. I always have at least 100 to 200 plants still in pots in my driveway and my garage through the winter and along my back walks that I haven't planted because I am always buying and collecting but never finding time to plant. So I bought this hellebore in May and never got it planted. And I planted it in October, and in November it started to bloom. And I thought, what have I done to this poor plant to really, and it bloomed from November to April. And it just kept on blooming. So I thought it was a freak occurrence. Every year since 2008, this hellebore has bloomed from November to March or April. This is Jacob, and he is one of the gold collection hellebores. Only grows about this high. This year, when the snow melted, it had 30 blossoms on it. And I had one in the garage that I bought for a friend, and all winter long I'd walk out through my unheated garage and there were flowers on it the entire winter. So the problem is finding it. Because it blooms in the fall, nurseries tend to have it. Even at Christmas time, I've seen it mixed in with poinsettias. So finding it, or either you've got to mail order it, or you've got to find a specialty nursery that carries it because it doesn't bloom at a normal time. And they do the same thing we do. They buy things that are in bloom because that's what you're more likely to buy. But that's Jacob, and the foliage is totally evergreen. It's like leather, and it's just a really handsome plant. Great for partial. No plant thrives in dense, dark shade under evergreens. Also, make sure you know what's causing your shade. If you get sun in the morning and shade in the afternoon, that's a shade garden. If you get shade in the morning and by midday it's full sun, you're looking at a full sun garden because that sun in the afternoon is hot, dry, and it will fry your shade-loving plants. So morning sun, dappled shade throughout the day, but dense, dark shade. Think about limbing up trees, thinning them out to let a little more light in because even hostas really don't thrive in deep, dark, dense shade. So hellebores are the rage right now. They're being greatly expanded. This is unfortunately known as the stinking hellebore, Helleborus fetidus, and it has, who cares if it blooms? That is evergreen foliage that looks absolutely magnificent throughout the entire year. It never has a bad spell. These are the buds that form in late fall or early spring, and it has lime green flowers, but chartreuse is in. So, it's really a handsome plant and beautiful. It also is known as the bear claw hellebore, but a very good, and it will multiply, naturalize, and seed about so that I have friends who have actual hedges practically of this very handsome evergreen. This is Christmas rose. This is the one that is on Port Marion, China. Turns kind of a dusty rose as the flowers go by. Again, all of these are in the 12 to maybe 16-inch height. And these are all the really leathery dark green leaves. Then we move into what are called the Lenten roses. And they have larger leaves that can get kind of battered in the winter. Sometimes you have to give them a haircut in the spring. But now they come in all different colors. There's beautiful pink ones with speckles. There are double ones in cherry red. This one is a lemon yellow with brown freckles, white double with that one. They come in all different colors. The big problem with a lot of them, though, is in order to take these pictures, I'm lying on the ground with my camera like this. So many of the newer the flowers tend to nod, but many of the new species, including Jacob, tend to have their flowers facing out. So that's kind of the thing. And the selections, I've got about 8 sitting in my driveway right now in all different color combinations. They're really, and I just dug up this one the other day. I bought it at the Boston Flower Show as a single little stalk. It's now a clump this big around, and when it blooms, it's awesome. So I dug that and moved it yesterday, as a matter of fact. I grew up in the Catskills. I'm a wildflower fanatic. If you've never been to Garden in the Woods, you really should take the trip up to Framingham. It is absolutely awesome in the spring. But Jack in the Pulpit was one of the ones I remember from my childhood. And many wildflowers won't adapt to just a shady garden. You need sort of woodsy soil. But Jack in the Pulpit will grow almost anywhere in partial shade. Very, very easy. Forms these clusters of berries that turn bright red in the fall. The one I die for and I love is this one. This is a Japanese Jack in the Pulpit. And it is dark chocolate brown with a white jack. That's the leaves. It has these big splotches. The head of that is about this tall, and it bloomed for about 7 weeks. It did not come back after this winter. I had had it for 15 years. But that happened once before to another one, and it had that bad winter, and then the next year it showed up. So I kind of got my finger. It'll set you back about $25 if you're lucky. It might be even higher than that, but it's stunning. Lungwort, native plant, pulmonaria, horrible name. All different varieties of this over the years now, too. Most of them have flowers that are bell-shaped in May, one of the first plants that attract hummingbirds back to the garden. Hummingbirds are getting ready to leave. I'm very sad. Many of them have this wonderful spotted foliage that looks very pretty right through the summer months. They come in white, they come in raspberry, they come in pinks, all different shades. Many of the newer ones now, the leaves turn bright silver. And there are a lot of silver plants for the sun, but not very many for the shade. And this looks like this today. It has leaves on it about this long, and it's a clump about this big. This one's called Majesty. So lots of neat lungworts on the market, and you just have to pick the one you like the best. A lot of shade plants are mounders, sort of round shapes, so I'm always looking for things to give me architecture in the garden, and Solomon seal is one of those plants that fills the bill. This is our native one, and that can grow up to 4 feet tall, and this is our Japanese one that is much shorter, compact, and variegated. So easy to grow, colonizes. My patch is probably 10 feet across now. So I dig it up every year for plant sales, which is a good way to get rid of it. Primroses, I moved a bunch of these yesterday as well. Lots of different members of this family. They need organic soil that is well drained in the winter. They will not tolerate winter wetness, but they will not tolerate really dry, sandy soil in the summer. This one I think looks like Tootsie Roll Pops. It's the denticulata types. This is the easiest, Varus. Most of them have leaves that look like lettuce. And this vulgaris, there's lots of different varieties. These are the ones I've fallen in love with. This isn't my yard, I will confess. It's not my yard. It's a garden up in Vermont called North Hill, owned by 2 gentlemen, one of whom passed away in the last year or 2. And when I walked into this garden and saw this, I just couldn't believe it. All different colors. These are called the candelabra primroses. And they start off with a little cluster of lettuce-like leaves, and they send up a spoke that has a little crown of flowers on it. And then, as that starts to fade, a new spoke comes out of the top of that and makes another wheel of flowers. And then another one comes up, and another one comes up, and they start down here, and they end up here with multiple levels of flowers. They need moisture. Unlike the other primroses, they want it damp. They'll die if it's dry at all. But they come in white, they come in magenta. This is now called the North Hill strain that you can buy from White Flower Farm. The only problem is, because it's a strain, you don't know which of those colors you're going to get. You know, you could end up with a yellow one, you could end up, the one I love is called Miller's Crimson. It's bright cherry red, and the hummingbirds go absolutely nuts over it. And I'm a real butterfly and hummingbird person. So just a different kind, especially if you have damp areas. This is probably one of the most underused perennials that a lot of people don't even know about. How many of you have maple trees? Growing under maple trees, I mean, just trying to dig a hole under a maple tree. They have dense fibrous roots. It's like jumping on a trampoline when you try to dig the hole. And the roots are everywhere. And they're very greedy. Guess who wins the war for moisture and nutrients when there's any kind of a drought? That great big maple tree. These will not only grow, they will thrive under maple trees. This is called barrenwort or bishop's cap, or epimedium is the botanical name. And they come in all different sizes and colors, and we have one of the world authorities living in Massachusetts named Darrell Probst. And I started collecting them many years ago. I'm up toward about 25 varieties now. There's some that only grow that tall. There's some that grow this tall. The flowers can be white, raspberry pink, purple. They have beautiful heart-shaped leaves. These bloom really early in the spring before the leaves come out, and then the leaves look gorgeous all summer long. There's an orange one called Orange Queen. This one's Sulphurium. You can see the pretty little heart-shaped leaves. And some of them, the leaves actually last into January and February, depending on the variety. So a really slow increasing ground cover, never crowd out anything else. So if you have a dry place or just average, any kind of shady location, but especially good if you're struggling with dry soil. So that's a plant that I can't get people to buy at the nursery, but once people have it, they come looking for more. Columbines will grow in sun or shade and seed about. This is our native rock columbine. This is another dwarf one that only grows about a foot tall, the Biedermeier strain. And then we have our beautiful, McCanna hybrids with the long spurs, and hummingbirds can't resist these. These, if you let them seed about, are not necessarily going to look like mom. They may look like, they might have funny little curled spurs and they seed about, so you have to be careful about letting them seed because sometimes they'll crowd out the good guys. This is called Brunera or Brunera, depending on, botanical names are tough, but I really like this plant. I call it perennial forget-me-not. It has these beautiful, true forget-me-not blue flowers, but it's a hardy perennial instead of biennial like most of my forget-me-nots. The leaves start out as small hearts and become very big hearts as the season progresses. This is Langtrees with silver speckles. This is a variegated form, but this is one of my favorite shade plants. This is Jack Frost, and he has the pretty blue flowers. Who cares? Look at that foliage. I mean, to me, that just, and I bought a new one at the Hosta Convention down in North Carolina called Alexander the Great. That's supposed to be Jack Frost on steroids. So, instead of growing this tall, he grows this tall. So I just planted him yesterday. I've had him since June, but I finally got him in the ground. Same foliage, but supposed to be much bigger. So we'll see. But it's just stunning. And it seeds about, and its babies look like it. They come true. So it's really a neat little plant. This is the longest blooming perennial I grow in my garden. It starts in May, it's still in full bloom now, and it'll go right into the frosty Octobers. Corydalus, I don't know of any common name for it. It's a member of the bleeding heart family. It has a very delicate foliage, only grows this tall. If it likes you, you will have hundreds of them. If it doesn't like you, you'll struggle to get it started. But once you get it, it comes in yellow, it comes in white, and it just blooms and blooms and blooms. Very delicate, nice to mix in with hostas and other larger leafed shade-loving plants. Now, most of you probably know this as Dicentra. Not Dicentra anymore. You know botanists, they love to change the names just as you get used to learning a botanical name, they change it. So this used to be Dicentra spectabilis, old-fashioned bleeding heart. It's now called, and I know you're all going to remember this, so I'm going to give you a test at the end. This is now called Lamprocapnos. It's on your handout, otherwise you'll never remember it. Took me about 6 months to really get it. But, it's an old-fashioned plant that still has such appeal. This year, the foliage actually survived on mine pretty much the entire summer, despite drought. Usually by July, it starts turning yellow and disappears, which I find to be a problem, personally. I save coleus to kind of stick in places, but there's the old-fashioned one. Now they're all different shades of red, including a deep, dark, bloody red, white, and this is one of the slightly newer ones. This one doesn't seem to fade out as quickly. Keeps its foliage. It's called Goldheart. I'm not a big fan of pink flowers with gold foliage, but this one is really stunning. So, and then you do this kind of bleeding heart, the fringe bleeding heart, the short ones, is still dicentra. So just a little confusing, but they have beautiful texture. They keep their foliage all summer, and they bloom all summer. One of the longest blooming perennials you can grow. This is King of Hearts, which is especially nice because it has blue tinted foliage. Mine looks kind of sad this year. Goat's beard. It sort of looks like an astilbe, but I think of this as being an astilbe on steroids. It grows about 5 feet tall. It has foliage like an astilbe, but much taller stature. Great for the back. I'm always looking for tall plants for the back of the border because every year my gardens are getting wider, and that means I need more plants that grow tall. It has very astilbe-like flowers. This is a dwarf one. This one only grows a foot tall, and it makes this perfect mound of shiny fern. And everybody walks in the garden, gives a little pat and says, "What's this?" Even when it has no flowers on it. So it's a really charming little plant, and these both will seed about, not invasively, but quite a bit. Foxgloves, again, there's something that either love you or hate you. They are a nuisance in my yard. I have gravel walks. They are in every garden all over the yard. We dug as many as 100 of them for one of the garden club plant sales a number of years ago. They are technically biennials. So the first year they're foliage, the next year they flower, but many of mine do come back for multiple years, and then we have a bad winter like last year, and I lose a lot of them, but then all the babies come up, and right now I've got, 70 or 80 of them that need to find new homes. So I especially like the white ones, and now there's pretty apricot ones, the Camelot series, apricot and all different shades of peach, really pretty. A friend's garden in Scituate, just to give you a little hint on some design principles. You want you want repetition to draw your eye through a design, but you also want contrast. So I think of a lot of other design principles, but repetition of color, form, and texture. So repetition of the foxgloves. If you had just one foxglove, it would be more of a focal point and a bullseye. But by repeating them, it draws your eye through the design. And it's a tall, spiky plant. But you have the mounded hostas, but they've also been repeated and a very different texture. You have ferns that have also been repeated, but also a different texture. So repeating the different textures and forms draws your eye, but having the contrast makes it. I have gardens of all daylilies because I have so many of them. They're gorgeous when they're in bloom. They are so ugly when they have no flowers. So, it's nice to have a mixture of plants rather than all one kind. Astilbes are finicky. Astilbes are moisture lovers. And during periods of drought, you need to monitor them closely because in one day they'll look fine, the next day the edges will be brown, and the next day they'll be completely crispy. And sometimes they do not come back. A lot of times they don't come back. So really moisture, they'll grow in full sun, but the key is a moisture retentive soil. Lots of organic material, peat, compost, manure, the soil moist crystals, some way to keep them moist. All of mine are looking pretty crispy right now. I'm hoping it's just season's end rather than the past. But the plumes are beautiful. I leave the plumes on through the winter months. Sometimes it's the only thing I can see out above 3 feet of snow. And then they seed about, but look at the foliage. I grow them mainly because the foliage is so beautiful. Catalea grows 3 feet tall. August Light and some of the other ones, you can have them this tall up to 3 feet tall. So lots of different varieties and different colors. They are delicate, so sometimes they look better mass planted. This is a friend's garden. I would prefer mass planting 3 or 4 of the same color together rather than the multicolored look, but they do have a presence if you plant more than one. We're going to leave the shade. We got to the month of June in the shade garden, so now we're going to go to the sun garden. And the first thing that people think of in the spring and always come into the nursery looking for are the ground phlox. The problem with ground phlox, and if you have lost them, you may be killing them with kindness. Ground phlox likes to be abused. It wants dry, rocky, gravelly, sandy soil. It does not want a wonderful, rich, composty soil with lots of mulch and automatic sprinklers. That's just really not its niche. It really wants, you see it cascading over, stone walls. That's what it likes is, light, airy soil that's well drained. The nice thing about them, other than that they bloom a long time and have, make these beautiful draping fountains, is that the foliage is evergreen. So if they aren't in a highly exposed area where it gets sun and wind during the winter, they'll keep their foliage throughout the winter. And it's kind of got almost a prickly juniper look to it. So it has a presence in the garden year-round, which is a plus. Candy tuft is a little bit the same idea. Evergreen foliage, sun, well-drained soil, although it'll take more richer soils than the phlox will. I did have a love affair with the bearded irises. They get borers. They need full sun. They need alkaline soil. They want you to add lime to the soil. They don't like our typically acid soil, so you need to amend it. But the dwarfs don't tend to get the borers, so these start blooming in May, and they only grow about 12 inches tall, and all different colors of the rainbow. I mean, many of them have thumbprints on them. That's called the Ritz. First edition, candy apple. But, very well-drained soil with at least 8 hours of sun a day. Dianthus, a lot like ground phlox. Rocky, gravelly, sandy soil. If it's rich, they kind of flop, they rot out, the centers die out. So, you want them in a lean soil without lots of mulch and lots of water. Lots of different colors. Again, they will also stay evergreen, and most of them have very pretty blue foliage, which is really attractive throughout the entire summer. And very fragrant. They're called cheddar pinks, and they really have a wonderful scent to them, so I always have them planted near walkways and doors. Then we get into the intermediate bearded irises. They're a little taller, 24 inches tall, blooming in mid to late May. Perennial geraniums are a nice plant to put with the iris for contrast. The old-fashioned bloody cranesbill, striatum. This is one of the best perennials on the market now. This is geranium roseanne. It has beautiful foliage. It's a sprawler. I call it a knitting plant. It starts off as a little rosette in the spring, and it gradually sends out long, elongated stems, and it flowers from June to frost without stopping. The foliage is attractive. It does not root down. It's not like some things that root down and all of a sudden you've got something strangling everything. It just kind of finds its way. If it comes up against a tall plant, kind of climbs the tall plant or weaves its way among daylilies. It's a very forgiving plant, and it just blooms and blooms and blooms, and it's very easy to grow in sun or part shade. I forgot to mention bearded iris. As far as dividing, the ideal time to divide and transplant bearded iris is really in August, preferably late August. If you do it too late into the season, they have those, I think I have a picture actually. Bearded irises come in every color of the rainbow. They are truly magnificent, but they are just such high maintenance. They're just beautiful. As an individual flower, they're some of the prettiest flowers you can grow. I did bring, this is one of the things I actually brought pictures of. So in August, which is when I think is the best time, mid to late August, the best time to divide them, this is what they look like. That's my other objection to them. They look ugly in July and August. The foliage, no matter what you do, no matter how healthy they are, they get brown streaks, they get spots, they just plain look ugly. So you dig them up, they've got these tall leaves and these scraggly little wimpy root systems. Iris tend to grow from the back. So if you look at them, you'll find most of the growth goes from the back of the plant and continues that way. And this other part that was there before tends to die out. It might have little side shoots on it, but most of this is non-functional. As you can see, there's the new growth coming out from the back of the iris. These are little buds that would develop leaves eventually, but most of this is dead. And the roots are usually almost non-existent on that part. Look at that part. It has nothing left to it that's, of any use. These are all ugly, and I just take a sharp clippers or a sharp knife and just cut that off, and replant. I don't know whether I have, so I have a picture here where I've just, cut them clean. Then then take off about half the foliage. You want the energy to go into making new roots, not in trying to maintain something this tall, not to mention that weights them and makes them flop over. When I plant them, because their roots tend to go this way, I think we try to plant them that way, and they just fall over. So what I usually do is I make a hole, make a little cone in the middle of the hole, set the top of this rhizome on top of the little mountain, but put the roots down the side and then backfill. This has to stay above the soil line. So the top of an iris needs to be exposed to the sun. If you plant this below, it may rot or it will not bloom until it manages to come up above the surface. So, plant them, but get the roots down deep. They'll come back up to the surface, but at least that will anchor them temporarily. Water them, firm the soil, and don't plant them. I think the tendency is to take them and plant them all, facing outward. Guess what happens? You end up with a big hole in the middle because they grow backwards. So you want to face them in different directions to make it a clump rather than, you understand what I mean? I didn't bring that picture. I should have brought that picture, but we've got a lot of pictures to go through. But they are, if you plant them now, and I am going to be planting some this week. I have contractors at my house killing all my gardens, and I had to dig some up because they were stomping all over them. So they were dug. They'll be planted, but they will probably heave out of the ground. Sometimes you can throw them on. The ones that do the best are the ones you throw on the compost pile. Those are the pieces that you throw on the compost pile come back like champions, and the ones you carefully planted in the garden die. But, winter wetness is death to them, and lots of mulch. You don't want to put a lot of mulch, especially over the top of the rhizome. Yes, maybe cover the root part, but do not cover that rhizome because it'll cause it to rot. And then there are borers, but that's another whole program. Siberian iris are what I have turned to. They are much lower maintenance. They prefer acidic soils. They like moist soils. I live in a wetlands. They look great all summer long, foliage-wise. The foliage stays upright. First frost, it flops. But, it's grassy-like foliage. The flowers are smaller, so if you're a flower arranger, you can use them in arrangements. I just find them lower maintenance, and they're not just those little 2-inch purple flowers anymore. They've come a long way from the little 2-inch flowers. So this was one of my first ones that my mom gave to me, and it had little 2-inch white flowers. Now they come in pink and lavender. This one's called Pink Haze. This is a 5-inch flower on one called Silver Edge. This is Isabel, and Isabel has about 5-inch flowers, and it's a combination white and yellow. There's some beautiful magenta. This one is a 5-inch flower called Ready Made, and this one is called Ruffled Velvet, and it looks, you just want to go over and pat it. It looks just like pure velvet. So they're really lower maintenance plants and much more adaptable to typical New England soils. And if you ever get a chance, this is Tranquil Lake Nursery in Rehoboth. Not too far from here. You can head down 495 and then get on 44, I think. I worked there for about 15 years, and I'm giving lecture there October 3rd. They have a whole workshop day with lots of great speakers, but this is what it looks like in June. They specialize in Siberian and Japanese iris, which bloom in July, and then you'll see the daylilies later, but it's a neat place to visit, and Warren Leach is awesome speaker and one of the best garden designers in New England as far as I'm concerned. We all love peonies. Peonies are one of the longest-lived perennials you can grow. Houses burn down, all that's left is a chimney, and those peonies just keep on coming up. They have great foliage, but Murphy's Law says the day that the great big double peonies open and start to bloom, you will have torrential downpours, and they will all end up lying down, splat in the mud. I really recommend, if you grow the big double ones, to get peony hoops. They're a worthy investment. I have hoops that my mother gave to me. She had had them for at least 30 years. I've had them for 40 years. They're very rusty, but they still work. And you know, there's semi-doubles. I've gone to a lot of the semi-doubles. This is good old Festiva Maxima. It's been around since 1924. So if you have a white one with a little touch of red in it, it's probably Festiva Maxima. Great foliage. There are also tree peonies, but to me, tree peonies are more of a woody shrub, and I've struggled with tree peonies. But now, somebody started cross-pollinating the herbaceous peonies, which die down to the ground, with the tree peonies, which are woody, and ended up with what we call Ito peonies. And they have the best attributes of both. The Ito peonies come in the colors that tree peonies come in, which the regular herbaceous peonies don't. So you have lavenders and pinks and salmons and oranges. And the foliage, you know, our regular peonies, I don't think the picture doesn't really show it, but they often have sort of long stems, and then the foliage is kind of up here, and they can look a little scraggly. And then the tree peony can really look scraggly. But the Ito peony, the foliage starts right at the ground. They grow about 3 feet tall. The foliage is gorgeous, but it's herbaceous. It dies to the ground every year. Unfortunately, they're still pricey. We sell them at my nursery. We usually buy them in and pot our own, and we were selling them for like $29.99. If you go to Russell's, you're going to pay $74. But to me, you know, I won't pay that. I'll pay it for a daily or a hosta, but I won't pay it for a peony. But they're awesome, and I have 2 different varieties, so I'm really excited about them. These are something you only transplant in the fall. So this is what it looks like when you dig it up in the fall season. I usually wait till October to dig up my peonies. They look like tree roots, and they have these funny little red, what are called eyes. And those are where next year's flowers and growth is going to come from, those little red eyes. So when you dig them up, you should only dig them up if you're trying to share them with someone. They'll live forever without division, or in my case, they've gotten too shady. Peonies really don't like a lot of shade, and mine were in full sun 40 years ago. Now those trees are giving them really full shade, not even partial shade, full shade. So you can split them, as with daylilies, hostas, and peonies. You want to have multiple divisions together. Split them up so you have at least 2 or 3 eyes in one division. Otherwise, they'll look like the ones you get at the nursery that have that one ugly little spindly stem, and you'll wait 3 years to see it look like something. And so a sharp knife, a clippers, just cut through that root. The next problem is when we replant them, because they look like tree roots, we usually plant them too deeply. Those little red eyes should be no more than 1 to 1.5 inches below the surface. If you plant them too deeply, they usually won't bloom. Of course, the first year you transplant them, they may not bloom anyway. So then you have to decide, you know, give it a chance. But I do divide them, and I've had them bloom the following season. But the fall is really the time to do them. Make sure you amend the soil and keep those. And if you're going to add 1 inch or 2 of mulch, think of that as almost being your soil. So not too deep. Better to have them too shallow, but be careful raking them in the fall, because it's easy to break off those little buds, and then your flowers are gone for the following year. A nice combination with the iris and the peonies and the oriental poppies, which I did not include. This is another one of those plants that's a rage right now. This is Baptisia, false indigo. It comes out of the ground looking like asparagus, which I just absolutely love the look of it coming out of the ground. It is a member, look at the foliage. If you grow peas, You know it's a member of the pea family. It isn't troubled by any bugs, any diseases, nothing bothers Baptisia. Has a deep taproot, it lives for 30, 40 years. This is the old-fashioned australis, which is kind of a violet blue. But now they've gone nuts hybridizing these things, and there's all new series of these. I took this at the Polly Hill Arboretum out on the vineyard with a garden club trip. It's called Mellow Yellow. Polly Hill really got into the Baptisias and had quite a few unusual varieties. Notice that the new growth is kind of gray in color. This is one of the new line of proven winner ones. They're called the Decadence line. This is Decadence Vanilla Cream. There's Decadence Blueberry Sundae, Cherries Jubilee, all kinds of foodie names. And then there's a whole group called the Prairie Blues line. This is Starlight Prairie Blues, and there's Twilight Prairie Blues and Midnight Prairie Blues. But they all are easy to grow, long-lived. They don't really like pots. They tend to look really ugly at the nursery in a pot. And it's going to take a year for them to really look like something, but they really are low maintenance, easy plants. The only thing is dividing them is a son of a gun. They have dense, they're just like huge turnips. And I haven't had the nerve to do it yet, but I have a bright yellow one that's about 6 to 7 feet across now, and it's got to go. It's called Screamin' Yellow, and I'll tell you, it is screamin' yellow. So this was my garden taken probably 25, 30 years ago. Notice that cute little blue spruce? That has been moved to another part of the yard and is over 45 feet tall now. So do your homework. This looks entirely different, but again, just the idea of progression of bloom, that's the biggest challenge with a perennial garden, to make the garden always look like it's in bloom when in fact everything only blooms for a couple weeks. Now we have so many tinted foliage plants that you can do a lot with purple leaves and gold leaves and ornamental grasses. Grasses didn't even exist at the time that I did this garden, but I divide the garden in thirds. And I put May bloomers, let's say June bloomers. June bloomers. But if you look in between, there's a lot of things that aren't in bloom. They're the spring flowering bulbs. They're the July and August bloomers. So I divide it, and I try to have a little of each month separated into the 3 sections of the garden. And that way it gives the illusion. And also, place your garden so that you're looking down. As you walk through the garden, you're looking down them, especially if you're looking out your kitchen window. When you look straight out, gardens don't look nearly as pretty. You'll see almost all my photographs are photographed looking down the garden. So have it angled so that you're looking down the garden, and think before you plant. Oh, and notice even repetition of the iris. Whoops, sorry. Over to the next garden. We'll draw your eye from this garden over to the next garden because it's the repetition of the form of the iris, which is a big form. And think about plant groupings, things that bloom together at the same time, like iris, poppies, peonies, and baptisia all go together and bloom at the same time. There are all kinds of salvias, just oodles of them. May night, this one happens to be one of my favorites. It's called Caradonna. It has black stems and stays nice and upright when some of the other ones tend to get a little sprawly, but they come in pink, they come in white, they come in blue, all different varieties. One thing you may not realize, and I didn't realize it first, they have, I hate to say it, but the foliage kind of smells like cat urine. So, just so you know, you don't have cats in your yard using it as a bathroom, it's the salvia. And just a little grouping of plants that bloom together late June. These are sundrops or anathera, very showy, a little bit on the spready side. Actually, a lot on the spready side. But they really glow with a tall catmint and a white salvia, some peonies thrown in. And this is catmint Walker's Low, which Walker's Low was actually developed in Massachusetts. And it's not Walker's Low because it's short. It's Walker's Low, which is the name of the little nursery in Foxborough. I don't think it's there anymore. It used to be an iris farm. But they named it because they were from Scotland or somewhere over there, and that was the name of their nursery, was Walker's Low. Okay, we've left the sun, we're into the shade, and it's midsummer. And there aren't a lot of flowers in the shade garden in midsummer except for annuals. It's all about the leaves. And this is my backyard in July, and people walk in and it's like, wow, it's so colorful and there are no flowers. Doesn't have to be flowers. You know, it's about foliage and textures and different heights and forms. This isn't my garden, that's a friend's garden in Hingham. Ferns, I mean, you can do a lot with ferns. This is our native cinnamon fern, which grows quite tall. Japanese painted fern, it's a gorgeous fern. And there are different variations in the amount of red in it, but it's silver, and it's nice to have a silver plant in a shady garden. This is a little dwarf maidenhair fern that only grows this tall and forms a ground cover. And it just got that wonderful, delicate texture to it. There's also tall maidenhair ferns. Coral bells. They've gone nuts with the coral bells, too. And again, you can do a whole food garden on the coral bells. This is the old-fashioned one with evergreen foliage, and this is a hummingbird magnet. They love those little teeny tiny bell-shaped flowers. Palace purple was the first of the colored ones. Then you've got silver scrolls. Again, food. Plum pudding, cherries jubilee. Sorry, brain freeze. I always get a brain freeze on this one. And it's on your handout. Lime Ricky. There's also key lime pie that looks a lot like it. This is citronelle, caramel. I mean, I have chocolate ruffles, all different food names. The nice things about these is they're evergreen. So even in the middle of the winter, I can look out and see those bright yellow leaves when there's no snow on the ground. So they will grow in sun. I like the colored, darker colored ones in a little bit of shade. But very easy to grow and great front of the border plants. And this is just taken at Kennedy's Country Gardens over in Situate. I mean, look at all the colors. That's all just coral bells. And it's all foliage. And it's there in the winter. Yes? The leaves or, well, I find the bunnies liked mine last year. Every once in a while, most of the time the deer don't like them, but the bunnies will, and slugs and snails will eat them too. They would like a moisture retentive but well-drained soil, and I think they do better in a little bit of shade, but drainage is important or they'll heave out of the ground, but not too dry. They don't really like pure sandy soil either. They need some organic matter mixed in, and I've probably got 30 varieties of these or more. And I used to laugh at my friends who said, oh, you're getting shade, grow hostas. I said, you mean those ugly green and white plants that people put along their front walks around here? I just never liked them. And so some of my daily hybridizer friends started giving me hosta plants. And as they started being hybridized more and more, I started realizing they weren't just green and white anymore. This one is shocking gold with bright red stems in the spring called Fire Island. This one feels like it's made of cardboard. It's so dense that even the slugs and the deer don't eat it. Unfortunately, its name is Tokudama Oreo nebulosa. But it's on the handout. Every variegation you can imagine, that summer music. I love this one because it's first one out of the ground and it looks like a flower arrangement. It has these long stems and then it vases out, so it's Montana Aurea marginata, another easy name to remember. But now they've gotten funky, all different shapes and leaf forms. This one's called curly fries. I love curly fries. I just think it is so neat. We are really lucky because we have one of the best hosta nurseries around in Holbrook, Massachusetts. Holbrook is right next to South Shore Plaza. And he has the most people go there just to tour his garden. It's absolutely beautiful. Cascading waterfalls, koi, little miniature railroad, a couple hundred varieties of hostas for sale in addition to shade plants and shade shrubs and trees. Only open weekends and may not even be open at this point in the season. He is the head groundskeeper for Northeastern University. and it's called cacciato or cacheto, depending on your preference, tomato, tomato, cacheto, cacciato. But it is in Holbrook, right on Route 37, right on the Braintree-Holbrook line, and it is fabulous. And he and his wife are the two nicest people you will ever meet. But I got curly fries there. I probably got, maybe 75 hostas at least from him already. This is the most popular hosta in the country right now. This is June, which is very pretty. This one is made of seersucker and cupped, and it's called Abaca drinking gourd, and it actually holds water. It has these long stems and then this seersucker-like texture, and it's blue. By the way, blue hostas, if you go over to a blue hosta and you rub that leaf, the blue color will come off. It is a layer that sits, called a glaucous layer, that sits on the top of the leaf. So if you grow these in the sun and rain will wear off that blue color, which is why in the spring they look blue, and by August they're all green. If they're grown under shade cloth like they do at the hosta nurseries, they'll keep the blue color throughout the summer. So it's because that layer of blue is being rubbed off. It's like wax, and it just wears off as the summer progresses. So grow the blues in as much shade as you can, and protected by tree leaves that will help prevent that being rubbed off. This was hosta of the year last year. It's called Rainforest Sunrise, and I love the minis. There are a whole bunch of little ones now that have leaves the size of a dime and only grow about 4 or 6 inches tall. So if you have a small garden, I grow most of these in containers now, little mixed containers with a whole bunch of little baby hostas that stand this tall, so I can see them up close and personal, because they're kind of like little puppies or kittens. And some of the mouse ears have leaves like leather. Nothing eats them, and they feel like cardboard. So a lot of that's frosted mouse ears. There's holy mouse ears, mighty mouse. This is country mouse. Oh, no, that's Daisy Doolittle. I have one called Country Mouse, too. And this one's Cameo, all kinds of fun little miniature baby hostas. But they can get lost in a big garden. And, just that combination of different colors of hosta with a few other perennials thrown in looks good all summer long, assuming the deer haven't eaten them and the slugs and snails haven't eaten them. And again, repetition of the blue hostas draws your eye through the design. That's my garden a few years ago. Lamium's a great undercover for the hostas. It stays reasonably evergreen, spreads into pretty large mats. Purple Dragon, White Nancy, Golden Anniversary, almost evergreen. Carexes are one of the only grasses that grow in the shade. Most of them are low mop-like grasses, and most of them are evergreen. So this is Evergold, this is Bunny Blue, this is Maui, and this one I just bought in North Carolina. I hope it makes it through the winter. It feels like razor blades, and it's bright lemon yellow, called Everillo. But this is the one I really like. If you go to Mass Hort or some of the other gardens, this is called Japanese forest grass. And it kind of takes a little bit for it to get growing, but then it cascades over and forms these big clumps. And every time the wind blows, you feel like you're at the ocean. It sways with the breezes. And this is what it looks like in the winter. It's not beautiful, but it's a lot better than not seeing anything. That one is Macroaureola, and this is all gold. And do I have I don't. And just a combination. Again, these are just foliage plants. You've got a great big hosta with the Japanese forest grass, the Japanese painted fern, astilbes, the coral bells. I mean, it's pretty even without a lot of flowers. And here's that garden. This used to be a full sun garden. Now it's a full shade garden. It looks like this from May to frost. And it's all just Japanese forest grass, ferns, different sizes of hostas. It's all about foliage, texture, and different colors, and it's no maintenance, other than trying to beat the slugs and the deer away. That's about all it is. For damp gardens, this is a great plant. This is Ligularia. This is called the Rocket. Stands about yay tall, and this is Britt Marie Crawford. That blooms in July. This is the first out of the ground in the spring, and this blooms in August. So it's in full bloom right now. So it's still in bloom end of September. The leaves are about this big, and they're chocolatey purple. The only problem is if it gets sun, it does that. And then when the sun goes away, it perks back up, but it really needs moisture. It will not tolerate really dry, sandy soils. This used to be called Cimicifuga. It is no longer called Cimicifuga. Common name is bugbane. Now it is called Actea. I have different species. Some bloom in July, some bloom in August, some bloom in September, and I have one that doesn't start until October. This one happens to be one called Pink Spike that has purple leaves. Full bloom right now. One lady approached me at a meeting and she said, "How could you recommend that plant? It stinks." I think the smell is lovely. I was smelling it today. It's a bee magnet, and we're all into pollinators these days, so I love it. This is also in full bloom in my garden right now. This is a native plant to the USA called turtlehead. It really does look like little turtles' heads. Has gorgeous, shiny, dark green leaves. There's a new one out called Black Ace, which has white flowers and stands about yay tall, which is absolutely gorgeous, but it's an awesome perennial. And it gradually spreads. This one happens to be Hot Lips. Hot Lips is got especially deep pink flowers and nice and darker foliage. This is one, I always laugh. This is monkshood. This is like a delphinium on steroids. I gave up on delphiniums a long time ago. Delphiniums to me are expensive annuals. But this looks exactly like a delphinium. The foliage is the same, except it's thick and leathery and shiny. And the flower is somewhere in between these two colors. It's not that lavender and it's not that blue. But this is a fall blooming one called Carmichaelii. It stands about yay tall. Will grow in the sun, but I think it does better in partial shade. It is poisonous. It's a native. And I heard Carrie Mendez give a lecture, and she said, unless your grandchildren or your pets are ground feeders, you really don't have to worry about, most things. Animals are smarter than people, so they usually don't go over and eat this. But all parts of it are toxic, so if you have a ground feeder in your family, then you may want to skip this plant. But it's an awesome late bloomer. This is a nuisance, but it's such a pretty nuisance. This is called Persicaria Painter's Palette. It's in my garden right now by the dozens. It is not a runner. It spreads by seed. And everyone who comes in the garden goes, "What's that? It looks so pretty in the shade. It looks like a tropical house plant." Stands about yay tall. The little insert here are the flowers. It's got little tiny red bead flowers that are in full bloom right now, if you want to call that a bloom. So it's a little collection of beads, and then those become the seeds, and they stick to everything. They stick to your gloves, they stick to your pants, they stick to everything as you walk through, and then they end up in every garden on my entire property. So, but the colors, it's just a striking plant. I dug up about 30 of them yesterday, and they'll just go on the compost pile. But I always save a lot for the people who visit. They're welcome to take them. I dig them up. It comes with a warning label, and you are not to call me when it starts spreading around your yard. But it's easy to dig up. I just take a pitchfork or a shovel, and it comes right out of the ground. It's not a spreader, but I have a lot of them. But it's so pretty. This is also just starting to bloom in my yard. This is toad lily, great October bloomer for shade. Looks like an orchid with really pretty little flowers. We're going to start speeding up here. Summer sun garden. That was the shade garden I showed you with all the hostas and all. That's what it looked like 30 years ago when it was all sun. So it's changed a lot. Pardon me? Same garden as the one that I showed you with all the pretty hostas and all the color. Because this blue spruce is 50 feet tall. This Quonset cherry has a trunk on it this wide. This magnolia is 40 feet tall. That's what happens after all those years of planting cute little trees. Coreopsis, easy to grow. This one, somewhat short-lived. The lance leaf ones, the thread leaf ones spread, sometimes more than we'd like. That's Zagreb. Some new ones coming out. And again, the best hybridizer in the country for these is Darryl Probst, who I told you is epimedium specialist, and he's got the Big Bang series. This is Mercury rising, but there's a whole bunch of them. This is another one of his. They're all different varieties, and they're all hardy because they're hybridized in western Massachusetts and easy to grow, and there's just a whole bunch of them. But this one really caught my eye. This was taken at the Coastal Maine Botanical Garden. I have had 2 sitting in my driveway for 2 years. Hopefully they'll get in the ground this year. This is Moonbeam, Coreopsis Moonbeam, and a friend used it as a hedge. She just kept clipping it. They bloom and bloom all summer long. Eventually they get a lot of seed heads on them. I take a hedge shears, I whack them, and they start blooming all over again. So easy to grow, full sun. Gaillardia, another full sunner. This one likes dry, sandy soil, will bloom all summer. If it has heavy, wet soil, it'll croak during the winter, and mine usually croak because I live in wetlands. You all know Shasta daisies. I don't think I need to tell you. That's Becky, one of the best ones. Every garden should have lamb's ears. How can you not go around and pat them? I mean, they're just so... I like Silver Carpet and Helen von Stein because they almost never bloom. I think the blooms myself are ugly. So, but that's a personal preference. And they're almost evergreen. If you want butterflies, Liatris, 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 depending on your preference of pronunciation, gayfeather, Kansas gayfeather, native American plant. And of course, I have to say something about daylilies. They've come a long way from the roadside orange ditch lily. Tiger lily is a thug. Don't put it near anything else you like because it will take it over. Daylilies do not change color. They do not go from yellow to orange or pink to orange. If you've got the thug anywhere near it, it's going to kill off your good ones. All different colors, as you can see. I won't go into the names. Ruffles and edges and eye zones. I just think they're yummy. I have spent as much as $250 on one plant. This is kind of the new look. These kind of watermark looks is the kind of the trend right now in daylilies. Edges, you know, gold edges and white edges and shark tooth type edges. There are over 70,000 registered varieties of daylilies. I don't think I'll collect them all. There are also double daylilies, which I don't particularly like, although I like oh darn, I can't remember her name. But this is the other trend right now. People are getting away from the round and ruffled and going to what are called spiders or spider variants or UFOs for unusual forms. And you know, most of them are 5 and 6 feet tall. So they kind of dance on the wing. A lot of these have 9-inch flowers. So they're pretty spectacular. We have Stella d'Oro and Happy Returns. I'm sure you know those to death. I think maybe almost overused at this point. And this is Tranquil Lake Nursery that I mentioned in Rehoboth when the daylilies are in bloom. We're looking at acres and acres and instant gratification. You walk around and say, I like that white one, I like that red one, I like that pink one. They dig them up for you on the spot in the month of July or August. You take them home bare root, but you know exactly what you're getting because you see the flowers, you plunk them back in the ground, and they keep on going. So really instant gratification, and you can spend anywhere from $5 to $250. I don't think they have any of those. If you're going to be digging daylilies or hostas, this is my preferred time of the year to do it. Usually I like by the end of September. If you've got a really big clump, I try to dig up the entire clump. I put a tarp on the driveway, I throw the plant in the air and let it fall down on the tarp multiple times. Then I grab it by the hair and I bang it. Get as much of the soil out of the roots as you can. A lot of times then you can just pull the pieces apart. But when all that soil's still around them, they're really hard to divide. So if they're really hard, take 2 pitchforks, insert them back to back into the middle of the plant. This is technically out of the ground, but I did it in the ground. And just keep pushing back and forth on the pitchforks. It's surprising how well it loosens them up. Sometimes I move them and do it 2 or 3 times in different directions, and they will just fall apart. Then you're going to, you know, these were washed off, but you don't need to do that. Again, give them a haircut and leave multiple divisions intact. If you do hostas in the fall, they'll recover. A lot of them have big leaves or they're tall. They'll recover their stature and leaf size in a year or two. If you do them in the spring, you'll wait another year or two. So I prefer to do them in the fall to keep the symmetry of the clump. And the daylilies, if you do them in late summer, you're more likely to get bloom the following season. So that's my reason for doing them at this time of the year. And again, hosta in the spring are much easier because they're just little noses, but then they don't have that nice perfect shape anymore. And the leaves don't recover. They usually look kind of wimpy for the rest of the season. Russian sage, wonderful long blooming perennial for dry sandy soils. Echinacea is another one that you can go nuts collecting. Butterfly magnets, I love them. Goldfinch magnets right now. They're all different ones. Cheyenne spirit, red salsa, some of these are turning out to be some of the hardiest of all the echinaceas, where some of the other ones can be a little finicky. There are different forms. This is picabelle, and this is called raspberry truffle. You can go nuts collecting these things, and I have a lot of them. If you have never been to the Coastal Maine Botanical Garden, oh my goodness gracious, you have got to go. It is absolutely unbelievable. It's just, this was one picture I took there, and I have 100 pictures all that look like this. That's a mass planting of Russian sage, so it really does look nice done as a clump. There's sedums there, and that's echinacea and grasses. It's just breathtaking. It is Booth Bay Harbor, awesome. Balloon flowers, long-lived. Another one that has a taproot, so a little hard to divide, but come in different colors. Just, again, textures, different textures and forms in the garden. This is a newer plant, that not newer plant, but newer to me. I just started growing this. This is called agastache or agastaki. Anise hyssop has a nice licorice scent to it. This is blue fortune, and this one is black adder. This blooms almost all summer and is one of the best pollinator plants you can possibly grow. And everybody's into helping our native bees these days, and our honeybees as well. That's a great plant. Bee balm, if you want cute little hummingbirds. Bee balm is just a magnet to them, and lots of different colors now available. I'm into this new purple one. It can spread. It is a mint. And this is a stretch in my yard that is over 15 feet long. It's basically buried everything else, hostas and everything else, but I can't cut it down when the hummingbirds are there, so it's all going to get pulled out this week. You all know black-eyed Susans. Black-eyed Susans are a thug. I prefer this one, which I call green-eyed Susan, which is 7 feet tall. Tall phlox gets mildew. Still love it because of the late blooming flowers and fragrance. Lots of different colors. Some are more mildew resistant than others. You all know sedums, good old sedum autumn joy, but lots of new sedums coming out. This one has purple leaves, lots of purple leafed ones. My favorite, Angelina. Low growing ground cover, only grows this tall, keeps its foliage through the winter. So it's totally evergreen. Goes from gold to lime green to almost cinnamon colored, and it looks great in containers too. Tall asters, fall blooming asters, native, except for this one. This one grows 7 feet tall and will not start blooming until the end of October. But some grow a foot tall, some grow 4 feet tall. Kind of rough looking, but nice late addition. I'm sure you know Montauk daisies, love sandy soil. Give these a haircut every spring, otherwise they end up with those ugly woody legs and like three leaves and one flower at the top of the stems. I cut them down to 2 inches every spring. Sometimes I give them a second or third haircut, and they are bushy and covered with flowers, so don't be afraid to give them a haircut. And they like dry, well-drained soil. And a truly perennial chrysanthemum. This is called Sheffield daisy, but it's a thug. I have a lot. Last but not least, ornamental grasses. This is a native grass, which is easy to grow. That one's called North Wind. It's one of the panicums. Northern sea oats. Make sure you cut off the sea oats in the fall, because if you don't, you will have thousands of babies the following spring. But I have some of these dried for over 25 years. They still look perfect. But everyone loves the miscanthus grasses. Just make sure you put them where they have plenty of space, because you will need a backhoe, a machete, 3 men to dig them up and divide them. They have a very dense fibrous root system. The only time to dig the miscanthus grasses and divide them is in the spring. So don't do it in the fall. If you transplant them in the fall, they almost always don't make it through the winter months. But you know, a lot of people tell me, oh, and that's my front walk. Again, do your homework. This cute little tree that I bought this tall, they told me would grow 15 feet tall. I don't have another picture of it here, but it is over 40 feet tall now. So my husband calls it the Grinch tree. It's a weeping Alaskan cedar. But notice the architectural use of the grasses. They're really very handsome, but that grass is huge now. And some people apparently cut these down in the fall. To me, that's half the beauty of them. They have sound, they have motion, they have texture, they have color. If we have 8 feet of snow, they get squashed. That's just the way it is. But I just really like the ornamental grasses. So whether you garden on a small scale, like my little reject garden at the end of my driveway, or on a grander scale like this lovely public garden out in Minnesota, I hope you'll all have time this fall to enjoy your gardens, because that may not be too far away. I covered about 1/25 of the plants I grow. It's so hard to decide what to show you, but you know, you're very, I told you I could talk forever.